My name is Nora Whitfield. I was 32 years old when my mother took my phone and locked me inside a hotel storage room while I was in labor, all because my younger sister's wedding was 40 minutes from starting. The first thing I remember after that was opening my eyes beneath the cold lights of a hospital room. My body felt impossibly heavy. Something pulled painfully across my abdomen whenever I breathed, and a monitor beside me marked each heartbeat with a soft electronic pulse. My mother, Marion, was standing near the foot of my bed. My father, Thomas, stood behind her. My sister, Leela, was still wearing the lower half of her wedding dress, although someone had thrown a gray cardigan over her shoulders. None of them asked how I felt. My mother stepped closer and lowered her voice. "Nora, before you say anything, you need to understand that I was trying to prevent a panic. Please don't call the police." I stared at her, struggling to connect those words with the last thing I remembered, the storage room floor beneath my cheek and blood spreading across my dress. Then another question pushed through the fog. "Where's my baby?" No one answered immediately. That silence frightened me more than the monitors, the pain, or my mother's request. Before I could ask again, the door opened and my husband, Adrian, entered. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes were red, and there was a look on his face I had never seen during our 8 years together. He looked directly at my mother. What he said next ended every excuse she had prepared and left my entire family silent. But the most terrifying part was that I still didn't know how he had discovered the truth, or whether the delay had cost our baby her life. Before I tell you how I ended up in that hospital bed, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and like the video if you believe the word family should never be used to excuse deliberate harm. Because that day forced me to decide whether preserving family peace was worth risking a child's life. To understand how my mother believed she could ask me for silence, we have to return to Briar Glen Hotel, 40 minutes before my sister's ceremony. I was 38 weeks and 2 days pregnant. My obstetrician had warned me to stay close to medical care and leave immediately if I experienced regular contractions, bleeding, or ruptured membranes. I had repeated those instructions to my mother and Leela more than once. They heard me. They simply believed the wedding would somehow outrank them. Briar Glen was a restored historic hotel with polished floors, high windows, and service corridors hidden behind decorative doors. The ceremony ballroom had already been filled with white flowers and gold chairs. Guests were arriving downstairs while vendors hurried between the ballroom and the reception space. I had spent most of the morning in the bridal area, carrying out the responsibilities Leela had refused to remove from me. Every time I sat down, someone needed the rings checked, a relative directed, or a vendor answered. Marion moved through the hotel with the temporary access card the venue had issued her as the family's event coordinator. She controlled the schedule, the decorations, the secured belongings, and almost every decision anyone made. That was how our family had always worked. My mother decided what mattered. My father avoided disagreeing with her. Leela's emotions became everyone's emergency. I became the person expected to manage whatever remained. "You're doing too much," Adrian had told me that morning. He was standing near the bridal room doorway, watching me press a hand against my lower back. "I promised Leela," I said. "You also promised me you'd leave if anything felt wrong." "I will." He studied my face as if he wanted to challenge that answer, but he knew what happened whenever he confronted my family directly. My mother accused him of turning me against them, and I spent days feeling guilty for conflict I had not created. Adrian touched my arm gently. "One message," he said. "That's all it takes. I'll come immediately." I nodded. Marion appeared behind him before I could answer. "The guests are being seated," she said. "Adrian, you need to go downstairs. Nora has to help Leela with the final preparations." "She needs to sit down." "She is sitting down." I was. Adrian looked at me rather than my mother. I gave him the small, reassuring smile I had perfected years earlier. The one that told everyone I could handle more than I should have been handling. He reluctantly left for the ballroom. Leela emerged from behind a dressing screen moments later. Her gown was perfectly fitted, her hair pinned into place, and her expression tightened when she noticed me leaning against a table. "You're not going to disappear on me, are you?" she asked. "I'm right here." Because Mom said pregnancy can make things unpredictable. My sister was not asking whether I felt well. She was asking whether my body intended to inconvenience her. "If something happens, I'll tell you," I said. "I only need you to make it through the ceremony. You can rest afterward." Marian heard her. Instead of correcting her, she glanced at the schedule in her hand. 40 minutes, she announced. "Everyone needs to stay focused." The first contraction came before she finished the sentence. It began as a tightening beneath my ribs and traveled downward until it felt as though a metal band had closed around my abdomen. I gripped the table. For several seconds, I could not speak. When the pressure released, I tried to convince myself it had been another practice contraction. I had experienced those before, and each one had faded without developing a pattern. Then warmth ran down the inside of my leg. I looked at the floor. A clear patch had darkened the fabric of my dress. When I touched the inside of my thigh, there was a thin streak of blood on my fingers. My doctor's warning returned with perfect clarity. Regular contractions, fluid loss, bleeding. Leave immediately. I reached for my phone. Marian caught my wrist. "What are you doing?" "I need Adrian." Her gaze moved from my face to the wet fabric and then to the blood on my fingers. She understood what she was seeing. "Are you sure?" she asked. Another contraction struck before I could answer. I bent forward and breathed through it, gripping the edge of the table. This one was stronger. When it eased, my hands were trembling. "I need to go to the hospital." Leela's face drained of color. "Right now?" "Yes, right now. But the ceremony starts in 40 minutes. I stared at her. For one brief second, she looked ashamed. Then she looked at our mother. Marian's expression changed into the calm, controlled mask she wore whenever reality refused to follow her schedule. "We are not bringing an ambulance through a lobby full of guests," she said. "I didn't say anything about an ambulance. I'm calling Adrian. If he comes rushing back here, everyone will know something is wrong." "Something is wrong." "Lower your voice." That familiar command worked on me even while I was in pain. I lowered it. Marian placed one hand on my shoulder. "There's a quiet room down the service corridor," she said. "You can sit there while I contact Adrian. We'll get you out through the side entrance without frightening Leela or alarming 200 people. I should have refused. I should have called Adrian before moving another step. But my mother had controlled every crisis I could remember. Even when I disagreed with her methods, some part of me still believed she would not knowingly place me in physical danger. I let her guide me out of the bridal area. Leela remained beside the mirror, one hand pressed against the front of her dress. She did not follow us. The service corridor was cooler and quieter than the public rooms. Music from the ballroom reached us only as a muffled vibration through the walls. Marian walked quickly. I had to stop halfway down the corridor when another contraction seized my body. She looked toward the ballroom doors rather than at me. "We're losing time." "I'm having a baby, Mom. This isn't something I'm doing to you." "I know that." But she said it with impatience, not concern. At the end of the corridor, she pressed her temporary credential against a reader beside a gray door. A green light flashed, and the lock released. The room beyond it contained stacked linens, sealed decoration boxes, spare floral stands, gift containers, and personal belongings the family had stored away from guests. There were no windows. There was no telephone. "This is a storage room," I said. "It's private. Sit down for 1 minute while I call Adrian." I kept my phone in my hand. "I can call him myself." Marian reached for it. "I need to explain. where we are so he doesn't come through the ballroom. I'll tell him. Nora, stop making this harder. She pulled the phone from my hand before I understood that she was no longer pretending to ask. Mom, I am handling it. She stepped backward into the corridor. I moved toward her, but another contraction forced me to brace myself against a stack of boxes. The door began closing. Wait. I'll be back. Leave the door open. Marion looked at me through the narrowing space. Leela gets one ceremony, Nora. Just once, this cannot become about you. The door shut. A second later, I heard the electronic lock engage. At first, I thought she had made a mistake. I grabbed the handle and pulled. It did not move. Mom. Her footsteps continued down the corridor. Mom, open the door. She did not stop. I struck the metal surface with the flat of my hand. Mom. For several seconds, I heard nothing but my own breathing. Then her voice came faintly from the other side. You need to calm down. I can't have you stopping the ceremony. My mind refused to accept the meaning of those words. You locked me in. I'm contacting Adrian. Give me my phone and open the door. I will come back. When? There was no answer. Her footsteps faded. I pulled the handle again until pain shot through my wrist. Then I searched the room, checking behind stacked linens and boxes for another door. There wasn't one. The only air came through a narrow vent near the ceiling. The walls were thick, and the music outside grew louder as the wedding approached. I pounded on the door. Help, somebody help me. No one responded. I had spent my entire life being told that my mother's control was another form of care. Standing inside that room, I finally understood what her care became whenever my safety conflicted with something she valued more. Another contraction drove me to my knees. I breathed the way the instructor had taught Adrian and me in our birthing class. Slowly in, slowly out, do not fight the pressure. But the room was not a hospital. Adrian was not beside me, and my phone was in my mother's hand. I pressed my palm against my abdomen. Stay with me, I whispered to my baby. Please stay with me. Outside the room, Marion unlocked my phone with the passcode she had learned during the wedding preparations. I did not know that then. I learned it later from Adrian and from the message history preserved on his phone. The first message appeared to come from me. I'm lying down for a while. Mom is with me. Please don't interrupt the ceremony. Adrian replied almost immediately. Are you having contractions? Where are you? My mother sent another answer. I'm fine. I need space. Don't come looking for me. That was the message that first unsettled him. Adrian knew I sometimes minimized pain. He knew I hated creating scenes, but he also knew I would never tell him to stay away if labor might have begun. He called. My mother rejected the call. Then she powered down my phone and secured it among the wedding belongings. Inside the room, I waited for it to ring. Nothing happened. I shouted until my throat burned. I struck the door with the solid base of a decorative stand, creating a sharp metallic sound that seemed loud enough to travel through the entire hotel. Still, no one came. My hope began shrinking into something colder. My mother had not left me there for a few seconds while she found Adrian. She had taken the one thing that allowed me to reach him and used it to make my disappearance appear voluntary. She was not managing the emergency. She was concealing it. Near the ballroom, Leela asked Marion whether the situation was under control. According to what Leela later admitted, our mother told her I was resting somewhere private and did not want the ceremony delayed. Leela knew I had been in pain. She knew there had been fluid and blood. She still did not ask where I was. My father heard only that I had become unwell and that Marion had handled it. He accepted her assurance without checking. That was his role in our family. He confused trusting my mother with protecting the rest of us. The ceremony began on schedule. I knew because the muffled music changed. First came the processional, then the low sound of the officiant speaking. Although I could not make out individual words, I understood what was happening beyond the wall. My family had not paused. Leela was walking toward the altar, while I remained locked among boxes, linens, and wedding gifts. I had spent years protecting her from consequences. I completed chores she forgot. I defended her when she disappointed our parents. I surrendered attention because Marion always said Leela was more sensitive and I was strong enough to understand. Now, when I needed my sister to leave her own celebration for 5 minutes and ask where I was, she chose not to look. A sudden pain cut through my abdomen. It felt different from the contractions, sharper, constant. When I shifted, I saw blood beneath me. Not a streak this time. Enough to darken the fabric of my dress and stain the floor. My hands became cold. I knew bleeding could mean something was wrong with the placenta. I knew my baby could be losing oxygen. I also knew that every minute I remained inside that room reduced the chance of someone helping us in time. I forced myself upright. The room tilted. I reached the door and struck it again, but my arms no longer carried the same strength. "Please," I called. "I'm pregnant, I need help." Footsteps passed somewhere in the corridor. I screamed. They continued without slowing, swallowed by the music and applause coming from the ballroom. I slid down against the door. My baby moved once beneath my hand. Then, for what felt like an unbearable stretch of time, I felt nothing. Downstairs, Adrian read the second message again. "Don't come looking for me." The wording did not sound like me. Neither did the idea that I would power off my phone after telling him I might be unwell. He left his seat and returned to the bridal area. I was not there. Leela was already in the ceremony. Marion intercepted him before he could enter the service side of the hotel. "Where is Nora?" he asked. She asked for privacy. "Where?" "She's resting." "In which room?" Marion did not answer directly. She told him I was emotional, that he would make the situation worse, and that I had specifically asked him not to interfere with the ceremony. Adrian showed her the messages. If Nora wanted privacy, she would still answer me. She turned off her phone. "My wife is 38 weeks pregnant. Why would you let her turn off her phone?" Thomas approached, after noticing the confrontation. "Adrian, your mother-in-law said Nora is being looked after." "By whom?" My father looked toward Marion. That hesitation told Adrian everything her reassurance had not. He checked the bridal room, nearby restrooms, and the public hallway. No one had seen me leave through the lobby. When he asked Leela during the first available break in the ceremony, she repeated the same explanation. "Mom handled it." Adrian stopped asking my family for permission to be concerned. He found Rachel Kim, Briar Glen's operations manager, and told her his full-term pregnant wife had disappeared inside the hotel. Rachel did not argue with him or ask him to protect the wedding. She asked for facts. When had he last seen me? Who had been with me? Which entrance had I used? Did I have my phone? Adrian showed her the messages and explained that the language did not sound like mine. Rachel checked the hotel system. There was no record of me leaving through a monitored guest entrance. She then reviewed the camera covering the service corridor outside the bridal area. The footage showed my mother walking beside me toward the secured section of the hotel. Minutes later, Marion returned alone. She was carrying something Adrian recognized as my phone. Rachel pulled the temporary access records. One credential had opened the wedding storage room shortly after Marion, and I entered the corridor. The credential was assigned to my mother. There was no corresponding record showing the door had been opened again. Rachel did not waste time confronting Marion. She took the venue's master access credential and led Adrian down the service corridor. By then, I could no longer stand. I was lying on my side near the door, one hand beneath my abdomen and the other extended toward the narrow strip of light at the threshold. My breathing sounded distant. The applause from the ballroom faded in and out. I thought I heard Adrian call my name, but I could not tell whether the sound was real. The last thing I remember was the cold floor against my cheek. Then the lock released. Rachel opened the door and found me unconscious. Adrian saw the blood first. For one stunned second, he did not move. Then he dropped beside me while Rachel called emergency services and ordered staff to clear the service entrance. She told the dispatcher I was full term, unconscious, bleeding, and had been discovered inside a secured room. Paramedics arrived through the side entrance my mother had wanted to use to protect the wedding from embarrassment. Only now, they were not arriving discreetly. Hotel staff blocked the corridor. Guests began asking questions. The ceremony could no longer be insulated from what had happened a few rooms away. As the paramedics lifted me onto a stretcher, Adrian tried to follow. Rachel stopped him only long enough to ask one question. Was she placed in that room voluntarily? No, he said. She was trying to call me. Rachel looked at the locked door, the access record on her tablet, and the blood on the floor. She preserved the corridor footage. She secured the access logs. Then she made an independent report to the police. By the time the ambulance pulled away from Briar Glen, the decision my mother would later beg me not to make had already been taken out of her hands. I remember nothing about the ambulance ride. Everything I know about it came later from Adrian, the paramedics' report, and the doctors who treated me. The ambulance reached the hospital with me still unconscious. My blood pressure was falling, the bleeding had intensified, and the fetal monitor showed that my baby was in distress. The obstetric team diagnosed a placental abruption. Part of the placenta had separated from the uterine wall, interfering with the oxygen reaching my baby while I continued losing blood. There was no time to wait for labor to progress naturally. I was taken for an emergency cesarean delivery while another team prepared to treat the hemorrhage. Adrian arrived moments later, but the operating room doors had already closed. He told me afterward that those doors were the first barrier he had ever wanted to tear down. He sat outside with blood on his sleeve from kneeling beside me in the storage room. No one could tell him whether he was about to lose his wife, his child, or both. Our daughter was delivered while I remained unconscious. She was immediately transferred to the neonatal team for stabilization and monitoring. I remained in surgery while the doctors controlled the bleeding. Hours later, I reached the hospital moment where this story began. My mother had already asked me not to call the police. My father and Leela were standing behind her, and I had just asked the question none of them answered. Where was my baby? Adrian crossed to my bedside. Elise is alive, he said. She's in neonatal care, but she's stable. Every part of my body went still. Alive. He nodded, taking my hand carefully. She needs monitoring, but she made it. Relief struck so hard that it became pain. I closed my eyes and cried, not quietly or gracefully, but with my whole body shaking beneath the hospital blanket. For several seconds, there was nothing else in the room. No wedding. No locked door. No police. Only the knowledge that my daughter was alive. Then Adrian looked at my mother. And Marion, it's already too late. Rachel reported the confinement before the ambulance left. The hotel preserved the corridor footage and the access records, and I still have every message you sent from Nora's phone. The room fell silent. That was what he had known. My mother's face lost all color. Thomas lowered his gaze. Leela's mouth opened, but no words came out. Marion recovered first. I did not confine her, she said. I placed her somewhere quiet because she was panicking. Adrian's voice remained controlled. She was found unconscious behind a locked door. I was coming back. You took her phone, so she could rest. You used it to tell me not to search for her. Marion looked at me, searching for the daughter who had always softened the truth for her. Nora, I made a bad decision under pressure. I thought if everyone remained calm, I could manage the situation without destroying your sister's wedding. You saw the blood. I didn't know how serious it was. I told you I needed a hospital. You were frightened. I was in labor. I understand that now. No, I said. You understood it then. That's why you took my phone. Her expression tightened. I was trying to protect the family. The answer hurt more than if she had admitted. She simply did not care. My mother believed she had protected the family. She had protected the ballroom, the flowers, the photographs, and the schedule. She had protected the version of herself who could manage every problem without public embarrassment. My baby and I had not been included in what she considered worth protecting. Leela stepped forward. I didn't know she locked you in there. But you knew I was bleeding. I knew you weren't feeling well. You watched me ask for Adrian. Mom said she had it handled. And that was enough for you. Her eyes filled with tears. I was about to get married. I was about to have a baby. I didn't ask her to do this. No, you just decided you didn't need to know what she had done. Thomas moved between us, as if his physical position could turn the confrontation into something balanced. We are all upset, he said. Your mother made a terrible mistake, but arguing while you're recovering isn't helping anyone. I looked at the man I had spent my life considering the kinder parent. A mistake is forgetting to make a phone call. She sent messages pretending to be me. Nora, when Adrian asked where I was, what did you do? His silence answered before he did. I trusted your mother. You always trust her when trusting her means you don't have to protect me. Marian began crying. I had seen her cry before. Usually, it was the moment everyone stopped discussing what she had done and started comforting her. This time, no one moved. A nurse entered after hearing our raised voices and asked my family to leave. Marian tried to insist that she was my mother, as if that relationship gave her automatic access to my hospital room. I told the nurse I wanted all three of them removed. The words felt foreign in my mouth. My mother stared at me. You can't mean that. I do. Nora, please think about what you're doing to this family. I looked at Adrian, then at the empty space beside my bed where I wished Elise could have been. I am. After they left, an obstetrician explained what had happened. The abruption itself could not be attributed solely to the confinement. It might have begun regardless of where I was, but the delay had allowed the bleeding and fetal distress to continue without medical intervention. If I had reached the hospital when the symptoms began, the doctors would have had more time and more options. No one could promise yet that Elise had escaped permanent injury. She would need continued observation and follow-up examinations. I also faced a long physical recovery from surgery and blood loss. The doctor delivered those facts carefully, but one sentence remained fixed in my mind. Earlier intervention would have reduced the risk. My mother had not created every part of the emergency. She had chosen to prevent me from receiving help during it. The next day, Adrian took me to see Elise. I was still weak enough to require a wheelchair. Every movement pulled against my incision, but I barely noticed once I saw her inside the neonatal unit. She looked impossibly small beneath the monitors. A hospital identification band circled her ankle. Another band around my wrist contained the matching information that identified me as her mother. I placed my hand through the opening and touched her fingers. They closed around mine. That was when the full weight of my decision became clear. Until then, part of me had still been thinking like Marian's daughter. I worried about the investigation, what relatives would say, whether my cooperation would send my mother to prison, and whether I would be blamed for destroying the family. But Elise did not need me to be a good daughter to Marian. She needed me to be her mother. I could not teach her that love meant protecting people who endangered her. I could not tell her one day that family loyalty required silence while asking her to trust me with her safety. The police did not require an immediate statement from me. Rachel's report, the security footage, and the access records had already established enough to begin the investigation. That gave me time to recover before deciding how fully I would cooperate. The evidence also meant my mother could no longer control what everyone believed. The corridor footage showed her guiding me into the secured section of the hotel. It showed her returning alone with my phone in her hand. The access system recorded her temporary credential, opening the storage room. There was no second access entry until Rachel unlocked the door. The ceremony schedule established how long I remained missing while the family proceeded with the wedding. Adrian's phone preserved every message Marion sent while impersonating me. The timestamps matched the period when I was pounding on the door and calling for help. My phone was recovered among the secured wedding belongings, powered off. Every choice had a timestamp. My mother could call it panic. She could call it confusion or an attempt to keep me calm. The records showed progression. She took my phone. She locked the door. She sent the first false message. She rejected Adrian's call. She sent another message, telling him not to search for me. She powered down the phone. She returned to the wedding. At every step, she could have reversed course. She did not. The investigation also recovered a message Leela had sent Marion before the wedding. Please don't let Nora's pregnancy stop the ceremony. I can't have everything become about her again. It did not prove that Leela asked our mother to lock me inside a room. She had not anticipated or requested that. But it explained what Marion believed she was protecting. When I confronted Leela about the message, she immediately defended herself. I was nervous, she said over the phone. I didn't mean for Mom to hurt you. You asked her to prevent my pregnancy from interrupting the wedding. I meant she should keep things calm. You knew I was unwell, and you didn't check. I trusted her. So did I. I'm sorry. Her voice broke, and for a moment I heard my little sister rather than the bride who had chosen her ceremony over me. Then she added, but involving the police is making everything worse. That erased the small opening her apology had created. Worse for whom? She's our mother. And Elise is my daughter. You don't have to forgive her. I'm only asking you to consider what a criminal charge could do. I considered what her choices almost did. Leela continued speaking, but I no longer needed to defend my understanding of what had happened. I ended the call. My father tried next. Thomas visited after I returned home, although Adrian remained in the room. My father carried flowers and an envelope containing a letter from Marion. He looked older than he had at the wedding. I should have checked on you, he said. Yes. I believed your mother knew where you were. She did. His eyes dropped to the floor. I mean, I believed you were safe. You believed what made it easiest for you to remain uninvolved. He did not argue. For a moment, I thought he might finally accept what his passivity had cost. Then he placed Marion's letter on the table. She's frightened Nora. So was I. She could go to prison. I could have died. I know. Elise could have died. I know that too. But you still came here to ask me to protect her. I came to ask for mercy. I looked at him carefully. Where was your mercy when Adrian asked you where I was? His face tightened. I made a mistake. You made the same choice you've made my entire life. You let Mom decide what was true because challenging her would have disturbed the peace. I never wanted you hurt. But you were always willing to let me absorb the hurt if it kept everyone else together. He began crying then, quietly and without demanding comfort. His regret was real. It simply was not enough to make him safe. I told him I needed distance. He left Marion's letter behind, but I did not open it that day. Over the next several weeks, Relatives contacted me with different versions of the same request. Some reminded me that Marian had been a devoted mother. Some said she had panicked. Others warned that cooperating would humiliate the entire family and permanently destroy Leela's memories of her wedding. No one could explain why preserving those memories required me to remain silent about nearly losing my child. Still, their words reached the most vulnerable part of me. I had been trained to believe that conflict became my fault the moment I refused to surrender. At night, I lay awake wondering whether I should minimize my statement. I imagined my mother in court. I imagined relatives turning away from me. I imagined holidays without my parents or sister. Then I would remember the storage room door. I would remember calling for help while music continued beyond the wall. Adrian never told me what decision to make. "If you don't want to cooperate, I'll respect that," he said. "If you do, I'll be beside you, but this choice has to belong to you, not them and not me." "What would you do?" I would tell the truth. "That isn't the same as deciding whether your mother should be punished." "No," he said, "but you aren't deciding her punishment. You're deciding whether the people responsible for that decision receive the truth." I looked toward Elise, sleeping in the bassinet beside us. The hospital band had been removed from her ankle, but I had kept it with mine. 2 matching bands. 1 connection. 1 responsibility I would not surrender. I provided my formal statement. I described the contractions, the bleeding, my request for medical care, the phone being taken, and the sound of the door locking. I described my mother's words about not allowing me to stop the ceremony. I authorized the lawful release of the relevant medical records and phone information. I did not exaggerate. I did not need to. The facts were serious enough. When the statement was finished, I expected to feel as though I had betrayed my family. Instead, I felt grief. There was a difference. Betrayal would have meant I had violated something honest and safe. Grief meant I was finally accepting that what I thought I had was gone. Marian was charged under the applicable state law with felony unlawful restraint and reckless endangerment. Her attorney initially argued that she had offered me a quiet place to rest and never intended to cause harm. The access records and false messages made that explanation impossible to sustain. A person who believed I was voluntarily resting would not need to impersonate me. A person who intended to help would not prevent my husband from finding me. A person who made one panicked decision would not continue making new decisions to conceal it. Marian eventually accepted a guilty plea. The resolution included a custodial term, supervised probation after her release, restitution, and a protective no-contact order covering me and Elise. There was no dramatic courtroom confession. My mother did not suddenly become a different person. In her statement, she expressed regret for the medical danger and said she had never intended for anyone to be harmed. But she also spoke about the pressure of the wedding, the money our family had invested, and the panic she felt when everything threatened to collapse. Even during her apology, she remained focused on the event she had tried to preserve. The wedding survived. Our family did not. Briar Glen cooperated fully with the investigation. The hotel preserved its records, reviewed its access procedures, and strengthened restrictions on how temporary credentials could be used. Rachel never attempted to become part of our family conflict. She had simply recognized that an unconscious pregnant woman found behind a locked door required evidence to be protected. Her professionalism had accomplished what my relatives would not. It had allowed the truth to exist outside Marian's control. Leela remained married, but she later admitted that every time she looked at her wedding photographs, she remembered where I had been while they were taken. She sent several written apologies. In one, she acknowledged that she had known I was experiencing pain and chose not to confirm whether I was safe. I believed she was sorry. I also remembered that her first response had been to protect Marian and the wedding. I acknowledged receiving the letters, but I did not restore contact. Thomas remained with my mother. His later apologies were more honest than his first, and he admitted that his refusal to challenge Marion had helped create the family system that endangered me. But he continued asking whether the no-contact order could eventually be softened. He still wanted reconciliation before safety had been rebuilt. I maintained my distance. Ending contact did not feel triumphant. There were days when I missed the version of my mother I had spent years hoping she might become. I missed my father's quieter kindness, even after understanding how little protection it had provided. I missed Leela before every interaction became a measurement of which sister mattered more. But missing someone did not make them safe. Forgiveness, if it ever came, would not automatically restore access. My physical recovery took months. The incision healed before the fear did. Closed doors made my heart race. A powered-down phone could send me back to the storage room before I understood what had triggered the memory. I began professional trauma support and learned that healing did not require me to minimize what happened. Adrian supported me without trying to supervise every movement. He asked what I needed instead of deciding for me. When I struggled, he reminded me that accepting help was not the same as surrendering control. Elise remained under medical observation after leaving neonatal care. Each follow-up appointment frightened me. I watched the doctor's expressions, waiting for someone to identify a permanent consequence of the oxygen deprivation and delayed treatment. No permanent neurological injury was discovered. She grew stronger. Her movements became more confident. Her cries filled our home. She developed the habit of gripping one of my fingers while she slept, just as she had done when I first touched her inside the neonatal unit. Her survival did not erase what happened. It gave me the chance to make sure the pattern ended with me. One evening, months after the wedding, I sat on our living room sofa with Elise resting against my chest. The 2 hospital identification bands were preserved in a small box on the table. My phone lay beside them, fully charged and within reach. Adrian checked the front door before going into the kitchen. For a moment, I stared at the lock. Then I stood carefully, supporting Elise against my shoulder, and walked to the door myself. I turned the lock from the inside. The sound was the same kind of quiet mechanical click I had heard at Briar Glen. But this door belonged to my home. My phone was in my reach. My daughter was safe in my arms. And this time, the lock did not take away my choice. It protected it.